The late morning sun poured through the towering glass windows of the downtown business district, turning the streets into a shimmering grid of steel, glass, and motion. Vanessa Cole stepped out of her car with the ease of someone who carried authority in her very posture. But today, she wore none of the visual markers that strangers usually associate with power. Her outfit was understated: a pair of tailored dark jeans, a crisp white blouse under a navy blazer, and flat black loafers. Her hair, in natural coils, framed her face in a soft halo, and a simple leather tote bag swung at her side. She could have been any young professional on her lunch break, except she wasn't. At just 30 years old, Vanessa was the CEO and founder of Cole and Hart Capital, a private investment firm with a portfolio that stretched across multiple industries: real estate, tech startups, renewable energy, and most recently, a controlling stake in one of the largest regional banks in the state. But she never flaunted her wealth or position. She'd learned early that the quiet confidence you carried inside often spoke louder than the flash of a diamond ring or the growl of a luxury engine. Today's stop at the bank was supposed to be quick. A simple withdrawal for a last-minute real estate opportunity she'd been chasing for weeks. The seller had suddenly decided to accept offers from private buyers, and cash on hand could mean the difference between securing the property and losing it to a competitor. Vanessa had an hour between meetings, enough time to park, get the withdrawal, and be back in her corner office before anyone noticed she'd left. The bank branch sat at the corner of 8th and Main, its limestone facade and columned entrance giving it a gravitas that spoke of age and tradition. Inside, the air was cool and faintly scented with lemon polish. The marble floor gleamed under the soft hum of fluorescent lights, and the quiet was punctuated only by the muffled conversations of customers at the teller windows and the occasional beep of an ATM. Vanessa walked toward the counter, her heels clicking against the polished stone. A young teller, no more than 25, with neatly combed hair and a polite but distant expression, greeted her with a rehearsed smile. Vanessa returned it, setting her tote on the counter and pulling out her wallet. She slid her ID and account information across, explaining she needed to make a large cash withdrawal. There was nothing unusual in her request, nothing to make it stand out. Except perhaps the amount she mentioned. The teller's eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly before she took the ID, scanning it carefully. Vanessa noticed the subtle pause, the faint crease forming between the woman's brows. The teller glanced from the photo to Vanessa's face, and then back again, as if searching for some discrepancy. Vanessa's own expression remained calm. She'd been here before, not in this exact branch, but in this moment. In this subtle shift of energy when someone's professional politeness strained against the disbelief they didn't want to show. She could feel the flicker of it in the air, the way a room changes when trust is replaced by suspicion. Still, she said nothing, letting the teller do her job. Her fingers rested lightly on the counter, nails trimmed and unpolished. She could hear the faint murmur of a man speaking to another teller beside her, the whir of a printer somewhere in the back. The young woman at the counter picked up the phone, pressing a few buttons before speaking in a low voice to someone on the other end. It wasn't until the teller's eyes shifted toward the corner office, where a man in a crisp gray suit sat behind a desk, that Vanessa realized this transaction was no longer routine. The man, middle-aged and broad-shouldered, stood and walked toward them, his polished shoes making soft, deliberate sounds against the marble. His face carried the kind of fixed smile that wasn't quite friendly, the kind that told you a decision had already been made before he even reached you. Vanessa straightened slightly. She knew this wasn't going to be as simple as she'd planned. The branch manager's footsteps were unhurried, almost casual, but there was something in the way he carried himself that set the tone before he even spoke. His suit was immaculate, tailored to fit a man who clearly cared about appearances. And his tie was a deep burgundy silk that caught the light as he approached. But his eyes, sharp and assessing, told a different story. He came to stand beside the teller, glancing briefly at Vanessa's ID before looking her over in a slow, deliberate sweep. It was the kind of look that measured not just what you were wearing, but what you were worth, in his estimation. Vanessa could feel the shift, the subtle shift from customer to question mark. "Ms. Cole," he began, his voice smooth. "I understand you'd like to make a large withdrawal today." Vanessa nodded once, meeting his gaze. "That's right. Everything you need should be right there." She gestured lightly to the ID and account documents on the counter. The man picked up the ID, tilting it toward the light, then set it down without comment. "Do you have any additional proof of identity? A passport, perhaps? Or a second form with your current address?" "I have what I usually use for banking," Vanessa replied evenly. "This ID and the account details should be sufficient." The manager's smile tightened. "Ordinarily, yes. But for amounts like this, we like to be absolutely certain we're speaking to the account owner." The way he said it, "we like to be absolutely certain," made it sound less like protocol and more like suspicion. Vanessa could almost feel the unspoken words hovering behind his own. "You don't look like someone with this kind of account." Behind her, the line of customers shifted, the low hum of conversation beginning to fade as curiosity replaced idle distraction. Vanessa was aware of it, the way a performer might feel the weight of an audience gathering. Her instinct told her that anything she said from here on out would not just be heard, but watched. She kept her voice calm, but inside she could feel the faint tightening in her chest. Not fear, not even surprise, but that familiar ache of recognition. It was the same ache she'd felt as a college student when a store clerk had followed her down every aisle. The same one she'd felt in boardrooms when her words were ignored until a male colleague repeated them. The same one that came when people decided who she was before they let her speak. "I am the account owner," she said again, softly but clearly. "If you check your system, you'll see my name right there." The teller glanced at the computer screen, then at the manager, as if silently asking whether to proceed. He gave a small shake of his head. "Let's not rush this. I've seen situations where someone had the right paperwork but wasn't authorized to act on the account. It happens more often than you'd think." Vanessa let the words sit between them for a moment, watching his expression. She could tell he believed he was being reasonable, maybe even protective of the bank. But the truth was, she could also see the calculation in his eyes. The one that said this wasn't just about security policy. This was about what he thought he saw standing in front of him. Her fingers curled slightly around the edge of the counter, nails pressing into the smooth surface. She wanted to keep this civil, to give him the benefit of the doubt, but she also knew there was a line, and he was stepping closer to it. The room felt quieter now, the distant sounds of printers and coins dropping into drawers muted under the growing weight of the standoff. The manager clasped his hands in front of him, a gesture of control, and said, "Perhaps if you could come back with more documentation, we could move forward without any misunderstandings." Vanessa studied him for a long second. She could already feel the heat rising in her. Not anger yet, but the awareness that this errand was becoming something else entirely. Something she'd faced before, and something she'd promised herself she'd never walk away from again. The pause stretched just a little too long, and in that silence, the entire atmosphere of the bank seemed to change. The low murmur of customers had thinned into near silence. Somewhere toward the back, a printer jammed and made a sharp mechanical groan, then stopped, the sound oddly loud in the stillness. Even the faint hum of the air conditioner seemed to press down heavier than before. Vanessa could feel the shift in the air the way a sailor might sense an oncoming storm. She had been here before, not in this exact spot, but in this moment, where a polite exchange tipped into something deeper, something rooted in assumptions that went far beyond procedure. The manager stepped a fraction closer, resting one hand lightly on the counter as if to ground his authority in physical space. "Ms. Cole," he said, his tone wrapped in that careful customer service politeness. "I understand this is inconvenient, but for an amount like this, we really have to be cautious. You'd be surprised how often fraud attempts happen with high-value accounts." Vanessa met his gaze evenly. "And you'd be surprised how often the rightful account owner is treated as a suspect." It was subtle, but she saw it. The flicker of discomfort in his eyes. He glanced briefly at the other customers, perhaps realizing just how many ears were now tuned in. Behind her, a man in a baseball cap whispered to his companion. A woman clutching a leather purse stood a few feet back, watching intently. The teller shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable, fingers hovering above the keyboard as if caught between two commands. The urge to process the withdrawal and the instinct to defer to her superior. Vanessa took a slow breath. She had no interest in raising her voice. She knew from experience that volume could be twisted into aggression. But she also wasn't about to shrink under the weight of someone else's bias. The manager straightened, his expression tightening. "Ms. Cole, without additional proof, we simply can't proceed. It's nothing personal." The words landed with a kind of cruel irony. Nothing personal. Yet here she was, standing in front of him, the entirety of his doubt resting squarely on who she appeared to be. She could feel the customer's eyes on her now. Some sympathetic, some skeptical, all curious. The kind of curiosity that wasn't about the transaction itself, but about whether she would push back or walk away. Vanessa shifted her weight slightly, her voice calm but steady. "Tell me, if I were a man in a tailored suit with a business card from a law firm in my pocket, would we still be having this conversation?" There was another flicker, his lips parting, as if to respond, then closing again. He didn't answer. The teller glanced at him once more, almost pleadingly, but he ignored it. "I'm going to have to ask you to return when you can provide what we've requested. This is standard policy." Vanessa looked down at the counter for a brief moment, then back up at him. She could feel the old familiar heat in her chest again, but alongside it was something else. A decision forming, solid and immovable. She was done entertaining the performance of policy when the truth was standing in front of them, wallet in hand, identity unquestionable except in their minds. And if he wanted to question who she was, he was about to get his answer. Vanessa's fingers smoothed the edge of the counter, not in nervousness, but in calculation. The kind of slow, deliberate gesture she used when she wanted to control the pace of a moment. The room felt frozen, the small crowd of silent witnesses now leaning in almost imperceptibly, their curiosity feeding on the stillness. She let the pause hang just a beat longer than necessary before she spoke. Her voice, when it came, was calm and measured, each word landing like a quiet strike. "You don't understand," she said, looking the manager directly in the eye. "I own this bank." It was the kind of sentence that didn't need to be shouted to fill a room. The air shifted instantly, as if every molecule had suddenly taken notice. The teller's fingers stilled completely on the keyboard. A man in line let out a soft, involuntary laugh, the kind that slips out when someone thinks they've just heard a joke. But the laugh died quickly when he caught the unshaken look on Vanessa's face. The manager blinked, once, then again. "I'm sorry?" Vanessa straightened, her tone still even but with an undercurrent of steel. "6 months ago, my firm acquired a controlling interest in your parent company. That makes me your employer, and I am the owner of the account you've been refusing to access." The teller's eyes widened, darting between Vanessa and the manager like she was watching the slow motion of an avalanche starting to fall. The background murmur in the branch had gone completely still. The kind of quiet where even the faint ticking of the wall clock seemed unnaturally loud. The manager's posture faltered. His carefully cultivated composure cracked in tiny ways, the twitch in his jaw, the way his hand shifted from the counter to his pocket, the slight narrowing of his eyes as if he were trying to find a thread of doubt to pull on. But there was none. Vanessa reached into her tote and pulled out a sleek leather folio. From it, she withdrew a single printed page. A press release from the bank's own website announcing the acquisition by Cole and Hart Capital, her name bolded in the headline. She slid it across the counter with the same care one might use to place a queen on a chessboard for the winning move. "This," she said quietly, "is why I'm not here to ask you to trust me. I'm here to remind you who I am, and that I have every right to be here." Someone in the line exhaled audibly. The teller shifted in her chair, almost sitting taller now, as though her entire alignment had shifted in the span of seconds. The manager, however, still lingered in the space between disbelief and dread. "Now," Vanessa continued, her voice low but resonant, "I'm going to give you a choice. We can proceed with my withdrawal and treat this as an unfortunate lapse in judgment, or we can escalate this in a way that will have lasting consequences for everyone involved." She didn't blink. Neither did the room. The manager didn't speak right away. For a moment, he just stared at the paper on the counter, as if reading it might change the reality it carried. But the black print didn't bend to his disbelief. It stayed fixed, undeniable, permanent. Vanessa didn't move until he did. She could feel the eyes of the entire branch still on her, and she wanted them to witness not just what she'd said, but what came next. Finally, the manager cleared his throat, his voice suddenly quieter. "Ms. Cole, perhaps we could discuss this in my office." Vanessa gave a single nod. "Yes, we should." She picked up her tote and followed him across the marble floor. Every step was measured, steady. The quiet in the branch was different now. Less skeptical curiosity, more watchful respect, as though the room had subtly shifted in her favor. Inside his office, the blinds were half drawn, cutting the sunlight into angled stripes across the dark wood desk. The air smelled faintly of coffee and the sharp tang of toner from the copy machine in the corner. The manager gestured to a chair, but Vanessa remained standing. She wanted her presence to fill the room, not be diminished by sitting. "I owe you an apology," he began, his tone overly formal, as though the right arrangement of words could undo the moment. Vanessa didn't allow him to finish. "An apology is a start," she said evenly, "but it's not enough. What happened out there was more than a misunderstanding. It was profiling, rooted in an assumption about who should or shouldn't hold wealth, authority or ownership." He shifted in his seat, his eyes dropping to the desktop. "I've been in your position before," she continued, "where you believe you're acting within policy, but your judgment is colored by bias you might not even acknowledge. The difference is, I'm not here as just another customer. I'm here as the owner of this institution, and that means I'm responsible for how it treats every person who walks through those doors." The manager exhaled, his posture softening as if the weight of the moment was finally settling on him. "So here's what we're going to do," Vanessa said. "Effective immediately, you will schedule a mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion training for the entire staff of this branch. It will be led by external experts, not just a memo from corporate. You will also review your current verification procedures to ensure they are applied evenly to every customer, regardless of appearance." She leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering. "And let me be very clear. If there is any repeat of this kind of treatment toward me or any other customer, there will be staffing changes. Starting with you." The words landed without heat, but with an authority that needed no volume. The manager nodded once tightly. "Understood." Vanessa straightened, her decision final. "Good. Now process my withdrawal. I have another meeting." Within minutes, the transaction was completed. The teller avoided direct eye contact, but Vanessa noticed the faint flush in her cheeks, shame mingling with something else, perhaps a recognition that this was a moment she would remember long after today. Vanessa took the envelope, tucking it into her tote. She didn't need to count it. She already knew her point had been made, and her authority established beyond any shadow of doubt. 1 week later, the same corner of 8th and Main looked different. The sky was overcast, the sunlight muted to a soft silver, and the glass facade of the bank reflected the clouds in long, pale streaks. Vanessa stepped out of her car and crossed the sidewalk without haste. She wasn't here to conduct business today, not the financial kind at least. Inside, the branch was noticeably quieter. The hum of conversation was lower, and the staff seemed unusually attentive to the customers they were serving. A few faces lit up in polite recognition when she walked in, but the expression on the branch manager's face was something else entirely. A mix of caution and respect, as though he was still replaying the moment from last week in his mind. Vanessa didn't head straight for the counter. Instead, she walked to the small open area near the waiting chairs, where a cluster of employees were gathered. She had arranged for this meeting in advance, making sure the branch would be staffed to accommodate it without leaving customers stranded. The training she'd ordered was already scheduled, but today wasn't about policy manuals or PowerPoints. Today was about faces, names, and understanding. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying clearly without being loud. "I'm Vanessa Cole. Some of you already know me from last week, perhaps more memorably than you expected." A ripple of nervous smiles moved through the group. She let the moment breathe before continuing. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm here because what happened last week wasn't just about me. It was about every customer who walks in here carrying the weight of assumptions they didn't earn, and every employee who may not even realize when they're letting those assumptions steer their decisions." She spoke plainly but with warmth. She talked about the importance of respect, not just as a corporate value but as a daily practice. She shared moments from her own life when she'd been underestimated, misjudged, or dismissed. Not to scold, but to connect. "You are the face of this institution," she told them. "When someone walks in, they're not thinking about who owns the bank or the size of the building. They're thinking about who greets them, who listens to them, and who decides whether their word is enough." Her eyes moved from one face to another, the young teller from last week, who now looked her in the eye with something like gratitude. The security guard standing just inside the entrance. The manager himself, whose posture had lost some of its defensive stiffness. She didn't mention the withdrawal, or the confrontation. Instead, she reached into her tote and pulled out a slim envelope. She walked to the counter and placed it there. "This is a deposit," she said simply. "Same account as before." The teller accepted it, her hands steady this time. Vanessa knew the gesture was symbolic. She didn't need to move her money around to make a point, but she wanted them to see that her trust wasn't gone. She believed in holding people accountable, but also in giving them the chance to do better. As she turned to leave, the teller spoke softly. "Thank you for coming back." Vanessa gave her a small, genuine smile. "We're all here to learn." Outside, the air was cool and still. She glanced back at the bank for a moment before walking toward her car, the reflection of the gray sky in the windows now broken by the warm glow of light inside. Power, she thought, wasn't just in owning the building. It was in shaping what happened inside it.